The Torah reading this week is Parshat Ki Teze, which begins with a very unusual mitzvah. And it's a mitzvah we're going to discuss today, as the name of this class is Elul, the month we're in, and the captive woman. And we'll read the first, it's on page 1046 in the Stone Chumash. It's in the book of Devarim, chapter 21, and it begins in sentence 10. And we're going to read the first 5 sentences to give you a tone of what the Torah is talking about here. When you will go out to war against your enemies, and Hashem your God will deliver him into your hand, and you will capture his captivity, or you will capture captives, depending on the translation. Sentence 11, and you will see among the captivity a woman who is beautiful of form, and you will desire her. You may take her to yourself for a wife. You shall bring her to the midst of your house. She shall shave her head and let her nails grow. She shall remove the garment of her captivity from upon herself and sit in your house. And she shall weep for her father and her mother for a full month. Thereafter, you may come to her and live with her, and she shall be a wife to you. But it shall be that if you do not come to her, if you do not desire her, then you shall send her on her own, but you may not sell her for money. You shall not enslave her, because you have afflicted her. Very unusual 4 sentences in the Torah, and we're going to look at it from 2 levels of perception, but let's look at it in the mitzvah level. The Torah here is doing something which stands out amongst the whole book of the Torah. And Rashi quotes the source that says that, and says that lo dibra Torah ela keneged yetzer hara, that the Torah here is talking in response to the evil inclination within a person, which is understood to be as follows. Marrying a Gentile woman is out of bounds by Judaism. Certainly committing an atrocity like rape during war is also outside of Judaism. So what's the Torah talking about here? So as properly understood in its mitzvah form, in its practical application to reality, this section goes as follows. If a person finds themselves out at war as a soldier and sees a woman who is very enticing, and he feels a tremendous desire for her, rather than simply prohibiting it, the Torah makes the following provision under these unusual circumstances. And here's where the early commentaries come in. If she consents to it, you can live with her once, and thereby in a way designate her as a potential wife for yourself. After that has happened, there's a procedure for you to undertake where in fact she can return back to your house. There's a 4-step procedure of her shaving her head, not cutting her nails, having her mourn for her father and mourn for her mother for 30 days. And thereafter, she can become your wife. But if you choose at that point not to continue and take her as a wife, you can't harm her in any way, you can't sell her, you don't own her, but she has to be set free because she's been, in a sense, raised to a level of under your protection, and you have to act with her accordingly. And certainly, if she ends up as your wife, you have to treat her like a proper Jewish wife, and she converts to Judaism, and she remains a wife to you like any other wife would be, with all the guarantees that the Torah offers a wife in terms of monetary guarantees and physical safety and other guarantees that the Torah provides. What do we see from this in terms that it's included in the Torah? There's a concept here, and there's a concept is that at a certain level, when it is untenable for a person to face a prohibition of something being out of bounds, the Torah opens up a channel, a permissive channel albeit an arduous one and a complicated one. But at least knowing there's a channel, then the person has an opportunity to stay in control of themselves, to, in this type of a situation, obtain the consent of the woman to live with her, knowing that this, if he really wants to follow through on this, then she becomes protected through his action. And he has to go through an entire 4-step process of bringing her back, shaving her head, letting her nails grow, having her mourn for a full month for her father and for her mother. And then you have the opportunity to take this person for a wife.
Rabbi, you introduced a conditional phrase, if she consents. I was not aware of consent being necessary here. So you'll clarify that? It's
not obvious in the text either, but there are 2 sources of the Rishonim, of the early commentators, who say particularly that, of course, it has to be a situation where the woman shows an interest and agrees to eventually become this person's wife. Okay, so, and I'm not sure that every opinion says that, but that's the prevailing opinion.
And if she does not agree, then what?
And then you have to, you could look for a different captive amongst the captives and, seek her consent.
Thank you.
Okay, and that is a very sensitive point here. And like I say, it's not the opinion of every early commentary on the Torah, but there are 2 main sources that say that explicitly. And I did check that out because I wanted to understand the parameters. But an example to this, a very mild example, is the following thing. There was a Musar master named Rabbi Simcha Zisel Ziv, who lived in Europe. He was the founder of one of the main schools of Musar. And he adopted a personal custom that if he became angry and he felt like he needed to express his anger, he would go to his closet, he would take out a particular coat, a red coat, put it on, and only then would he allow himself to express his anger. And you could laugh at something like this and say, what kind of nonsense is this? And the answer is because he recognized the fact that there are times when anger can't be contained and needed to be expressed. And I'm going to create a channel through which I can at least be mindful of what I'm doing, and hopefully I can mitigate, or if not eliminate, the need to express the anger that I feel. And that's a good context of understanding this section of the Torah, and that's the concept of Lo Dibra Torah Elo Keneged Yetzer Hara. That sometimes, and I think this is a particularly wise insight, especially when it comes to dealing with adolescent children, boys and girls, that if something becomes simply a wall of no, then it becomes an uncontrollable situation. But if somehow you can find a way forward for the person, for the child, for the adolescent, where you can say, well, I don't think this is a wholesome thing, but perhaps if we go through step A, B, C, and I don't have anything cogent to tell you right now, then there'll be a way forward here. And that often by itself gives a person a chance to contain themselves and control themselves. And that's what the Torah is ultimately aiming for here. Now, I became aware of a class by Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz given a couple of years ago, which is going to be the main theme here, and that is the understanding, the Kabbalistic, allegorical understanding of this section of the Torah that is written out by the Ohr HaChaim. The Ohr HaChaim is a commentary on the Torah. It's found in all of the standard chumashim of the Torah. Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz of Jerusalem did a brilliant job of laying out his thoughts and understanding them in a very interesting way. And I want to try to put them on the table here. But I want to understand that first and foremost is the reality of what the Torah is talking about. And then there's an allegorical understanding that he puts forward. So let's begin looking at that. In Judaism, women are often used as a metaphor, a mashal, for many spiritual ideas. The most obvious is on Friday night, we sing Eshet Chayil Mi Yimsa, the accomplished woman, where is she to be found? And that section comes from the book of Proverbs the end of the book of Proverbs, is considered to be an analogy to the soul of a person, attaining its full beauty. It's an analogy to the Shabbat, and that's why we sing it on Friday night. Of course, there's applicability to real live women, and hopefully people can express that as a loving tribute to their own wife. But the commentaries go through these sentences and they show how the Eshet Chayil, this woman of value, this accomplished woman, can describe the Torah itself. It can describe the nefesh, the soul of a person. It can apply to Shabbat. And this idea of using a woman as a paradigm or as an example or as a mashal, as an analogy to something is not unusual in the Torah. And this is where, based on sources, Kabbalistic sources from the Zohar that he cites, the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh Rabbi, his name was Rabbi Chaim Mitar. He's buried on the Mount of Olives. I've mentioned him here before. He has a very famous yort site towards the middle of the summer, where today still tens of thousands of people come to his grave on the Mount of Olives opposite Jerusalem. And he was a Moroccan-born rabbi who came to Jerusalem, died at the relatively young age of 49, right around 1750. And he wrote this commentary, which oftentimes really moves into allegorical, metaphysical concepts here. And I wanted to look at it together. So he begins by saying in Parshat Ki Teze, which talks about this Eshet Yafat Torah, a woman of beauty who was captured during war. That's what we're talking about. So on the literate level, as we said, the Torah allows a man during the time of war who sees among the enemy a beautiful captive woman who particularly appeals to him. And I just want to play this out just once again. He can take her for his wife. And he's permitted to have relations with her. And then the continuation of that relationship requires him to do the following protocol. As we mentioned, 4 steps, brings her into his home. She shaves her hair off of her head. She lets her fingernails grow wild. She mourns and cries for her father and for her mother for 30 days. And after that, she's elevated to be his wife if he still desires her. And then he must marry her. And if he doesn't want to, she's protected. So what just on the physical level too, something I wanted to point out here. The Torah here is doing an interesting thing here. It's something that's inherently contradictory. The Torah is setting up the possibility of marriage, which seems to be very unsanctioned, and making an extraordinarily difficult process to follow to discourage the person at the same time. And that's where Rashi says that clearly the Torah here is not endorsing anything, but the Torah rather is trying to make a concession to an overpowering evil inclination that flares up in a moment like in warfare or in stress and really can't be contained by a normal person. So the Torah sets up this contradictory protocol to both enable and to discourage following through on this position. In some ways, you can almost look at it as a psychological ploy. So the Ohr HaChaim wants to say the following allegory and make up the following metaphor. That first of all, she mourns for 30 days. The 30 days represents, he says, this month of Elul, these 30 days before Rosh Hashanah and the days of awe. 30 days of preparation for us to face God as the judge of the world, and then to go through a period of teshuvah, and then ultimately to seek God's forgiveness on Yom Kippur. The way this mashal, this allegory plays out, is the neshama of the person, your own neshama, becomes described as a beautiful woman. It has radiance, it has grace, it has allure, it has holiness. Why? And why would you think of the neshama, the soul of a person, this way? Because the ultimate source of the neshama is directly from God Almighty, from the Shekhinah itself. And we know Shekhinah is a feminine word, which describes God's presence as if it is in the feminine form of presence, this feminine aspect of the divinity. So the Torah is laying down an idea here, and we can do it sentence by sentence. Ki Teze lemilchama, sentence 10. When you will go out to war against your enemies, and Hashem your God will deliver him into your hand, and you will capture his captivity. And that's that funny translation. Again, let's leave the direct, real meaning in the physical world of this. Who is your enemy? Who is your greatest enemy? Your greatest enemy is the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination that resides within you. Those proclivities and interests and desires that reside within you that lead a person astray, cause a person to want to rebel against God, cause a person to sink into themselves and be selfish, to hurt other people. So the first thing that this Parsha is saying is there has to be a point in time where you decide that you're going to make war with your enemy. You're going to engage your enemy. And that's the idea of when you will go out to war against your enemy. And if you do that, and again, this is in this allegorical sense, you can be sure that your enemy will be delivered into your hands. This is a war you can win, something that's counterintuitive because, face it, we're all sitting here thinking about the idea of the days of judgment. And we're thinking, look, this is who I am already. I've lived so many years. I tend to the same tendencies year after year. And yeah, maybe I'm a little better in certain areas, but I'm basically me. So we become discouraged because we feel as though, who are we kidding that this year is going to be different than other years? So the key to sentence 10 here is the extent to which we resolve to go out to war, to improve ourselves, to raise ourselves up. And yes, there'll be battles you will lose, but the Torah is assuring you that you're going to win ultimately. And there's even a Hasidic concept, which is not alluded to by the Ohr HaChaim, but Rabbi Breitowitz mentions it. And that is a certain sense that as long as I'm fighting the battle, I'm winning. As long as I'm taking it upon myself to resist and overcome certain aspects of my inner essence, which I realize I'm uncomfortable with and which don't really give me true happiness, as long as I continue to resist that and to resolve to change, that in itself is winning. Fighting the battle itself is winning. And I think that idea really is a very powerful idea because what you see, just as an example in totalitarian countries, is the smallest protests elicit the biggest response on the part of the government. You wonder to yourself, what's the big deal if a bunch of students are standing out in the rain in a square in China protesting the fact that they don't feel they have enough freedom? Give me a break. You have to send out tanks and soldiers and you have to do away with them. What is your big concern? And the answer is because resistance itself has a very undermining effect on evil. And that's what we have to think about as we enter this month. So let's get back to the analogy. The next sentence here. You'll see among the captivity a woman who is beautiful of form, and you will desire her. Okay? Now think about it in this idea. This is your neshama. You come at these moments that when you resolve to better yourself, and when you resolve to elevate your inner core of being, you're going to come to see within yourself, there's a beautiful neshama inside of me. There's proclivities towards kindness, empathy, tremendous concern for others, tremendous love for doing kindness and helping another person, tremendous satisfaction in investing in children and family and community. So this is what, so I'm going out to war, And what am I seeing? I'm seeing my soul in captivity within me. It attracts me. I want to connect to it. I want to reach this essence within me of my own neshama, my own better self. So what should I do about that? It's still remote. It's in captivity. I can't just simply run off together with this inner essence, because it's a sense of alienation that has taken place over time. So what's the protocol that the Torah is suggesting here? So let's look at this protocol again in the form of an allegory. Shave off the hair. Hair, and this is consistent in the Torah, is associated with a sense of immorality, wild ideas that emanate, that sort of captivate us for a time. And if you think about it, a person's hair, we spend a tremendous amount of attention on our hair. When you look at someone, you notice their hair almost first. It's a superficiality that distracts us. It's a way of presenting a person. And when you read about the billions of dollars in the hair care industry that permeates every society that you can imagine, you realize this sense that hair growing out of your head is meant to remind us of the idea that I can lash out in many different directions, and I can become captivated by my own thoughts, even when I recognize that those thoughts may be destructive and may be blocking me from what I understand to be greater priorities in life. My own grudges, my own misunderstandings, my own arrogant thoughts of feeling better than other people. So hair represents that. And I will tell you parenthetically that in the wrapping of tefillin, in the manufacture of tefillin, you will see a very interesting detail there. That when for example, the tefillin that goes on the head, there are 4 separate compartments, and each one has a different parsha, a different portion of the Torah written on it. You roll them up. You're required to tie them together with a hair from a bovine animal. And one of those hairs is even pulled through, so it's a little visible after the boxes are closed. What's the idea? An important idea, that if tefillin are meant to help me concentrate on what's important in life and connect me to God, then this tefillin has to encapsulate and address my whole self, every aspect of me, including the wildness, including the extraneous parts, including the ideas that seem to just grow out of me on their own. So getting back to this idea, as a person recognizes the holiness and the sanctity and the beauty of their own neshama, and you want to make it you. You want to release this captive within you so that you can connect in an unbridled way with this neshama. So the shaving off of the head is a process by which we seek to rid ourselves of baggage, to refocus ourselves on things that we know are really important, things that stay with us for a long time. For example, when you're a kid and you get a bad haircut and you're a little embarrassed to go to school, what do your parents tell you? Give it a week and it's all going to grow back fine. Nobody's even going to notice. So in a certain sense, it shows you how non-essential but distracting this is. So what do we do when we see our neshama in captivity? The first thing we do is we shave off the hair of the head to get down to what's really important and to eliminate anything that could be distracting to us. Next, the fingernails grow long. Our hands we use for grasping things. I want more. This is mine and not yours. Materialism, involvement in acquisition. In letting your nails grow, what a person is saying is, I'm going to lose my quick grasping power, because as my fingernails grow longer, my reach and my touch become more encumbered and more sensitive, and I have to be more gentle with them. That's again the idea that I see this captive within me, and I want to connect with him, and that's what I'm going to do. Crying over Father. here the allegory, according to the Ohr HaChaim's picture that he paints from these Kabbalistic sources, is that a person's crying over the idea that even my Father in heaven feels badly that I'm alienated from this essence of good that was placed within me. So in a certain sense, you see, as we live lives that are not in sync with connecting to God, and they're not in sync with living lives that are dominated and guided by our inner souls, by our better selves. So we're not only alienating ourselves from God, but we're causing pain to God. The same way a child who alienates themselves from their own parent for whatever reason causes the parent tremendous pain. So we need to focus on that, and we need to reflect on the idea that, yes, there's this pure captive soul within me, and I want to acquire it. I want it to become intimate with me. I want it to become who I really am. And in order to do that, I need to reflect on the fact that those things that have stood between me and this pure soul have in fact caused pain and anguish to God. And the mother here, in the Ohr HaChaim's analogy, is the Jewish people. Because this selfishness, the sense of preoccupation with my own wants and needs, cut me off from my fellow Jews. They prevent me from being a role model, from being a good influence, from being a paradigm of virtue, from being the kind of person that I really want to be, which is a person who not only is uplifted, but who uplifts other around. So what is the process here? The process is she cries for a month, it says here in the next sentence. She sits in your house, and she shall weep for her father and her mother for a full month. And the Ohr HaChaim says, what's the idea of a full month? This is the month, this month of Elul. This month when, in preparation for Rosh Hashanah and in preparation from Yom Kippur, a person feels a stirring, a person feels the sense that I want to grow closer to those aspects of me that I really value and trust. I would like to shed and get rid of and push aside some of the baggage which is holding me back. And this is the process a person can undertake according to the Torah. Go out to war. Decide that even if I lose battle after battle after battle, as the Torah says here, but if I persist in waging war against my ultimate enemy, which is those aspects that are holding me back, I will prevail. And I will see the beauty within me, that it's in captivity. And I will find a way through these 4 methods of protocol to draw close to that captive neshama, to make it my own, and then to spend the rest of my years connected to the Eshet Yifat Torah, elevated to be a wife. So this is the mashal. Now, Rabbi Breitowitz goes on and he does something which is very remarkable, and I think this has tremendous relevance to each one of us. He goes through a technical discussion, which is that there are 2 types of wars that the Torah talks about. One type is milchemet mitzvah, an obligatory war. And an obligatory war is really, there are no captives. And because the nature of the war is only, let's say, to eliminate Amalek from the world, which is a milchemet mitzvah. So there's no such thing as having a captive that might allure you and attract you. So we're talking here about a milchemet reshut, a war which is fought on behalf of the Jewish people, which is not a mandated war, but a war which is undertaken for a specific reason, perhaps to acquire additional land that the Jewish people need. I'm not sure if it includes a defensive war or not. I'm not sure which category that falls into. Now, once you're talking about, but obviously here, we're talking about the idea that it would seem that waging war against one's evil inclination is an obligation. So how does the allegory, Rabbi Breitowitz asks, how does this allegory that the Ohr HaChaim in his commentary weaves apply to a war that's not obligatory? So first of all, you have to realize that it's obligatory in the sense that a person's mandated by the Torah to improve themselves, but it requires your will and your decision to undertake to do it. But then he says something very profound. He says, sometimes when we're doing teshuvah, when we want to reconnect and we want to cleanse ourselves, and we want to go through this process of drawing close to God, which we have a sweet taste of. When people finish Yom Kippur, very often they feel such a sense of renewal and reclamation, and a sense of, my life is really more in order than I've ever felt before. So he says the concept is, it's not through any sense of self-hatred or self-abnegation. Yes, there are certain aspects of each of us in our nature that require us to simply put them out, to amputate them is the word he uses. But he says, in general, our experiences, when they awaken us to the beauty and potential of spiritual life, they're really our friends, because they open our eyes to recognize the contrast between the lives we're living, or what we see of ourselves, and this beautiful captive that's within us. And therefore, Rabbi Breitowitz goes out of his way to say, don't be afraid, or don't construe the process of drawing close to God as being, one of destroying yourself. It's not true. It's one of recognizing the fact that through all of my life's experience, through every day that I've lived and grown and done things that are wrong, it puts me in this position today to make a determination that I want to improve, and then to see within ourselves the inner beauty and potential that's there, and then to work towards going there. And in the course of doing this, he tells a story. I think he says it in the name of Pesach Kron. But he tells an interesting story that I just want to use as an analogy. The Pesach Kron tells a story about a man who he met in Israel, who was a competitive bike racer, who became an observant Jewish person. And when he met the person, he said to the person, he said, look, boy, you must feel terrible. You devoted so many years of your life to bike racing. You attuned your body, you worked out, you accomplished so much, you achieved a certain status, and it's something you excelled at. How could a person put that all aside? After all, these races all take place over Shabbat, and you aren't able to compete. How could you do that? And the person said something very profound. He said, I really learned the process of drawing close to God from bike racing itself. He says, because when you're in a bike race and you're in the final stretch, and it's a very competitive race, and you realize that the difference between winning or coming in second place, or even winning and coming in fifth place, is a matter of fractions of a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. He says, so what do you do at that point? You're trained to start shedding anything you don't need for this last lunge of the race, to lighten your load and enable you to pick up some additional speed so that you can win the race. He says, that's something I learned in bike racing. He says, so then as I saw myself being interested in Judaism, and I saw the opportunity to live an observant life as something that I was drawn toward, and that I appreciated, and that resonated within me, and that made me feel a certain sense of belonging and place and connection to God and connection to myself that I'd never felt before. I drew on my experience as a bike racer, and I said, okay, so what do I have to throw off right now? Which canteen do I no longer need? What can I shed along the way so that I can get to the finish line successfully? And it's a beautiful allegory in itself, in terms of how we as human beings, it's not a question of denying anything about ourselves. It's not a question of suppressing. It's a question of coming to terms with it and deciding in a certain sense that, this is what my hair will look like. I'm going to cut it so that it's not wild, so that it's more tame, so that it's more presentable, so that it's more dignified, and that's what I'm going to aspire to. I'm going to find, from my own life experience, I'm going to recalibrate my life so that this neshama, which I recognize as captive within me and is unable to be free, and I'm not able to associate with it, I'm not able to be intimately involved with my own neshama because of all these impediments that stand in the way. So a person can then come to a point, and this is the beauty of the analogy of the Ohr HaChaim and the fact that it's placed within the context of a war, which is an optional war, that we can use all of our previous experiences and all of our previous insights and understandings to determine, okay, this is going to be left behind, this is not. But once we decide we're going to undertake this process, once we decide we're going to use these 30 days to the greatest extent we can, and when, that we can focus on the upcoming days of awe, that we can focus upon the fact that we have an opportunity for renewal. We have an opportunity that it's not just a calendar flipping from 5782 to 5783, but it's a process of standing before God. It's a process of Hashem evaluating my life and me doing so with God. It's a process of me connecting more deeply to Shuvah, connecting back in touch with those aspects of my being, which it's painful for me as I see it to realize how disconnected I am. And therefore, it's an opportunity for me to do some hair cutting and some nail growing and some weeping as appropriate, not in despair and in rejection, but in reevaluation and reclamation, so that we really can enter into the coming new year and find ourselves in a higher orbit and find ourselves intimately connected with more goodness and more source of holiness that resides within us already, but somehow it's become alienated, it's become captive, and we're going to release it and make it free so that we can associate it with it more intimately, and that we can live lives that we're more proud of, that are more us, and that we can make 5783 a year different from and above and beyond all the years we've had until now. Happy to answer any questions. Okay. Unusual take on the this mitzvah in the Torah.